Hey, everybody, welcome back to the podcast. You're listening to the longest running superhero role playing game on Earth. I'm your host, the Game Master, and as of me recording this, I am kind of in trouble with my wife. She overhears me recording videos, and sometimes when a video is over, she'll give me feedback or something like that. And recently, I made a video in which I forgot to mention a character I should have, and that was Nadia LaFay. And the reason Nadia LaFay is important is when my wife and I first met and she first started to play in my game, Nadia was the very first character she ever made up. So that was for a space campaign where everybody was away from Earth. They were in deep space. The campaign was kind of inspired by Firefly, which was on TV for the first time when my wife and I first got together. And so my wife created this world called Antheria, and it was actually a fantasy world. And we have a lot of fantasy worlds in my game because we say that um, a lot of cultures like don't get to the point where they invent space travel. There's like a war or a disease or something happens and they just don't make it that far, right? So we kind of run it where it's actually more common for you to encounter a sort of a medieval culture than it is for you to encounter like an alternate sort of 20th century Earth style planet, right? Um, so that said, Nadia LaFay was from a fantasy world, but there were ships that would pass by and occasionally they would crash. And most of the people on the world of Antheria had no interest in technology. They didn't really understand it, they just thought it was junk. So Nadia was unusual in that she was interested in it, she was collecting it. Ironically, we were doing this long before uh, Zelda Breath of the Wild came out, but there is for sure a parallel to be had there. And just as Link in Breath of the Wild goes around gathering up bits of technology for various reasons, so too did Nadia LaFay. And eventually she builds a ship, which is good because what happens to her planet then is very similar to what happened to Krypton. So she is able to escape in this sort of skate pod or whatever you want to call it, very small one man kind of a vehicle. And while in the spaceways, then she is first of all, let me back up a little bit. So she is a fae, and I mean that in the sense of as in the word fairy, like Faerie, For a lot of people, I think when they think of a fairy, they maybe think of like Tinkerbell and not in certain other ways that the word has been used over the years, where in a lot of like mythology and stuff like that, a fairy can actually be like an extremely powerful thing, you know, almost in a lot of ways more similar to like a genie or something like that. So that is kind of the sense we're using when we say that she is a winter fae. That's kind of what we're going with that, right? Is she's like a really, really powerful ice spirit. And we kind of retconned her, by the way, and we hid because my wife liked the character so much, she wanted to play her in Dungeons and Dragons. And the closest race we could have was called a Frostwind Virago. I hope I'm saying that right. Frostwind is spelled like you'd think it's spelled, and then Virago is Virago. But at any rate, they're pretty tough, and so we said that's what Nadia was. And then I'm trying to remember the game we used. I want to say it was Iron Kingdoms. There was some like back when it was like third edition D&D was the thing, and all these other companies were making stuff that was D&D compatible. There was this one game, and I want to say it was called Iron Kingdoms, but I could be wrong. And they had a character class called Bodger, and that's what Nadia was a Frostwind Bodger. And in like GURP Supers terms, she'd be a gadgeteer, and so that was like her whole thing. And so then when we put her on the ship with the rest of the crew, she actually was the engineer for the ship, kind of our Scotty. And and then the guy who was supposed to be the captain was played by John Boggs, and he played a guy named Captain Jack. And Captain Jack was an alien. I think he was supposed to be like a Han Solo type guy, but like Han Solo is charismatic. Captain Jack was not. So that makes him kind of hard to describe. Um, but yeah, he was kind of an unlikable, kind of abrasive Han Solo type guy. And then he was supposed to be the captain of the ship, which was not working because if you're kind of out for yourself, then you're screwing over your own crew, right? They're going to mutiny and stuff like that. And so Captain Jack didn't stay in that game for very long. And then um I played, the same thing I always play, and this time around he was a communications officer of all things. Because out of all the characters in the game, he was actually the most adept with language. So that was kind of weird. That was a role we'd never seen him in before. Um, and then there was the Ant-Men, and they're a big race that I really wanted to talk about. Created by my best friend Dave Eckelberger, who is no longer with us, sadly. The thing that Dave would do is he'd put a little bit of himself into his characters. And I've mentioned this in some other videos, but I know not everybody watches every video. So I apologize to those who've heard this before, but um Dave would take meds that would kind of like normalize him basically. I'd never ever seen him off of his meds, so I don't know what he was like off of his meds. Dave himself, though, had a very low opinion of himself when he was off of his meds. So he created the Ant-Men, and they also had to take medicine. And the idea is if they would stop taking their medicine for any reason, they would basically mutate into what is more or less the xenomorph from the Aliens movies. And they would kill the rest of the crew and lay eggs in your chest and all sorts of crazy stuff. But that's if they go without their meds. As long as they are on their meds, then they are just the sweetest, nicest guys you could imagine. When I say guys, plural, first of all, Dave said nobody's ever seen a male of the species. They're actually all female. And the reason they are called ant men is he was basically saying the humans don't even notice what gender they are because they're so different than a human. And the humans aren't really respecting them to take the time to get to know them or anything like that either. And typically they travel in a group of five and they have telepathy. They have antenna. And then they like the oh boy, this is kind of hard to explain. So the entire race has a hive mind, on some level. And like in terms of all of them everywhere, that hive mind is almost like subconscious. But then they have guilds or castes or whatever. And so the one he was playing was the Navigator Guild. And so the idea there is that all of the other, well, okay, so like I said, the hive mind with other Ant-Men, because there were like warrior Ant-Men and scientist Ant-Men and stuff like that. The Navigators would have a really, really hard time knowing what's going on in one of those other casts. Does that make sense? As always, by the way, if anything does not make sense, ask me in the comments section and I'll do my best to clear it up. When I run a game in my house on like a Saturday afternoon, it's a back and forth between me and the players. So I'm like bad at doing this where it's completely one-sided. But at any rate, so like the navigators would have a hard time knowing what the scientists are thinking and vice versa, right? But all the navigators, I mean, there would just be, I don't know if the word would even be trillions, quadrillions, quintillions, I don't know, but there's like a ton of Ant-Men throughout the universe, right? And so all of the navigators have a very clear ability to tune in on what's going on with the other navigators elsewhere. So, for instance, if some huge black hole suddenly came into existence and started swallowing things up, and there were some navigators nearby that were aware of this and knew it was like some kind of a crisis, all of the navigators everywhere could then tell their various ships and crews and stuff, hey, this is what's going on. So that was kind of genius on Dave's part in terms of giving our characters an excuse to go over here or over there and deal with these various crises that they might not have known about otherwise. So that was cool. I also want to say something else before I move on. And that is Dave gave them this whole dark secret that was like, they're all kind of like a aware xenomorph in a way. And they're secretly taking meds. So that never happens. It's some kind of like I can't remember if he said it was like a hormone blocker or what it was, but there was something he had to take to keep this from the transformation from happening, right? And so all of this was on his character sheet. But I knew Dave. I knew that because like at one point, and I haven't done the video for this yet. At one point, Dave thought it would be funny to like he owned a company. He had this like Lex Luthor type character named Alex Stone, and he owned this company similar to LexCorp. And to make a long story short, everybody was working for him. And so Dave would conduct job interviews in character, and then he typed up this massive thing, and he's like, okay, so sign here, and this is a release form for the insurance company, and sign here, and this means that if anything happens in the workplace, you won't sue, and da da da. And none of the players were reading this crap that Dave had physically printed out and handed everybody. Because every single person in that campaign worked for Dave, right? In the middle, and he told me, since I'm the GM, in the very middle of this thing, there's a clause and he had actually gone online, by the way, and printed off some other company's stuff. And like he went in and changed the names of everything to like the Stone Corporation or whatever it was. And then in the very middle, in fine print, there's this part about basically by agreeing to work for the company, we reserve the right to surgically implant a bomb in your head. And if for some reason we think you're going to like run off with corporate secrets or something like that, we reserve the right to detonate said bomb. So I knew this and I was like, Dave, what are you doing this for? And he's like, hey, man, that's their fault for not reading it. And I was like, what? Come on. Like, this thing's the size of a phone book. You really expect him to read it? He's like, yeah. Probably shouldn't have let him do it, but I went along with it. And then eventually we ran this game where there was a corporate takeover and Dave blew everybody's mind, no pun intended, uh, by hitting the button. And he's like, if I can't have my company, nobody can. And like every product the company made, like they manufactured cars and stuff like that, every single thing that they manufactured had a bomb in it. And we called it the Day of Fire. And so all this stuff exploded everywhere. I'll do a video about that later. But the point is, so I know Dave, right? So when Dave says, I need to take medicine or else I'm going to turn into a xenomorph and try to kill everybody, I take that completely seriously. That Dave is okay with just ending a party, you know? And so I went out of my way in the game to make sure he always had his meds. And so it was never said in continuity why the Ant-Men need their medicine. It was just that they took medicine for something. So we've never actually established in continuity that they would turn into xenomorph or xenomorph-like creatures, when you order xenomorph from Wish, basically. But the Ant-Men became a very beloved uh group of recurring characters in our game. And um getting a little choked up actually thinking about it. So then one day Dave passed away in real life. And I don't know, a couple of years went by or something like that. There were characters go to like a space station. And it kind of hit me. And I was like, the Ant-Man would be here. Even if Dave's not around to play them, like they would still be here. And so I ran them as NPCs, and I was very good actually at doing an impression of Dave and running somebody that he ran the way he would have ran it, where to my players it was seamless, and that gets to them every time. So the Ant-Men are still these very beloved, very gentle, super kind, super nice, characters. And of course, Dave's intention there was supposed to be the juxtaposition of when they don't take their meds, they're going to turn into the exact opposite. They're going to be horrible. I've kind of quietly decided over the years that that's not continuity, that because even though it was on a character sheet, the fact we never said it outright in the game means it's not continuity. And I would rather have them just be this nice, kind of cuddly, cute bug race. Um, because it's a nice memory then of him, you know. And I use them very sparingly. So when one of them does show up in the modern day, like it has meaning. And by the way, I refer to him as kind of like cuddly and cute. That's probably confusing for people who aren't imagining him. So the Ant-Men look young, whether they are or not, just the way they're kind of in like the shape relationships of the head and stuff like that. They're very smooth. They have big eyes. They look almost kind of like a praying mantis or something like that, but like a Pixar version of like a teenage praying mantis, if that makes sense. And then their coloration is supposed to be that they're iridescent and they're kind of a blue-green color. And the antennae are supposed to be like feathers, where they're these very fluffy, um, wispy sorts of things. And something that Dave did, and it's so hard to put it into words. He was so good at this. He made an antenna to wear in the game. He had a thing he would like a hair, what do you call them? A hair clip, hair beret, whatever. He had a thing, right, that he'd put on his head, and then he made them. And he made the core of it out of, I think it was blue and green pipe cleaners. And then he bought something or other at like Hobby Lobby. And it was these big, like peacock feather kind of things. And he made these really elaborate antennae. I remember him saying he wanted to find a really good insect mask, like around Halloween. And he was going to sit there at the gaming table wearing this insect mask to try to, so when people looked over to talk to him, he wanted them to not see Dave, which was sort of ironic. And by the way, to this day, every single time I go into like a spirit Halloween or something, I look for an insect mask. I never find them. I remember seeing them all the time, like back in the 90s. I never see them anymore. At any rate, but the great irony with that was Dave could have been an actor, and the performance he would give as the Ant-Man was better than I see in movies and stuff. It really was. I'm not joking. And the faces he would make, he could go out of his way. And Dave himself, was not at all like boyish. He didn't seem young. He was like 10 years older than me or something. Um, if anything, he was kind of sarcastic and quick-witted and very smart, and he had like a dark sense of humor. And the Ant-Men were just completely innocent, and they always seemed naive. And like an Ant-Man, because he was running multiples at a time, right? He'd run like five of them at once, all wandering around, the away team or whatever, the landing party. There's like five of them there. And so he would, if if we needed a situation that called for like the red shirt stereotype from Star Trek, where one character would die, it was always an Ant-Man. And so when I say they're like naive, that's kind of what I mean is an Ant-Man might, for instance, go to Earth for the first time and like just pick up a landmine or something, and be like, what's this? And then like explode, right? So Dave, he had this way about him where he could look at you and he'd make his eyes so big. And he had brown eyes, all they were real dark. And I don't know, like they were always shiny when he played the Ant-Man. I distinctly remember that. So like if he would make his eyes really wide, they were somehow like I almost wonder if he was putting in eye drops or something, or if he could just make his eyes water at will. Like I never talked to him about it. I don't know what he was doing, but he did this amazing thing with his eyes where he would just look around like he doesn't quite understand what's going on and very childlike, Imagine the look, maybe you see it in a movie with like a little kid who goes somewhere and sees like Christmas lights for the first time ever or something, and the kid's like, wow. Or maybe it's like this time of year, it's a movie where a kid meets Santa Claus and he goes to the North Pole and he looks around, he's seeing all this for the first time. And his eyes are huge, and in his eyes, you can see the reflections of all the Christmas lights and stuff like that, right? Dave had that look down, and if I'm like, you go to this planet and it's this weird rainforest planet, and there's these huge, beautiful dragonflies, like the size of a horse, and they're flying around harmlessly, landing on plants, whatever, doing dragonfly things. He would in my living room where we're playing the game, the player himself is making the face. So so it's ironic he wanted to wear a mask, right? That was part of the charm of the Ant-Men. um they were, like I said, they were a very well received part of the game. And for people who have been playing the game since that game was ran, me just mentioning it, you know, will make people a little misty. Or sometimes I'll be somewhere, like we went to vacation in Florida this year, and I saw we went to this place. It's actually where they filmed The Creature from the Black Lagoon, which is kind of cool. And it's like you go on this glass bottom boat ride around this kind of lagoon thing, and they have, various uh creatures in the water, whether it's alligators or fish or whatever, but then they have a gift shop and they have all sorts of animal stuff in the gift shop because this, I think it's a state park. I can't remember or not, but so there's also like exotic tropical animals in this kind of, like, I don't know if jungle is the right word, but it surrounds the boat ride on all sides, right? And so we went in the gift shop, and this jungle or whatever you call it is so full of weird, exotic, colorful bugs. One of the little kind of statue things they had looked like an ant, and it was this blue-green color, you know. So I showed it to my wife and she kind of teared up. So that tells you a little bit about the Ant-Man. Um, them and Nadia, they were the two brightest spots in that game. Nadia, as is so often the case in our games, married one of the John Redbridges, had a daughter with him because one of the things with the Frostwind Viragos is their daughters are always another Frostwind Virago, basically. So um, they have a daughter in the modern age. And then at one point, we played a game set further in the future. And I can't remember now if it was like Legion of Superheroes or Guardians of the Galaxy or what it was, but we did something further in the future, and my wife had come up with this whole big like family tree of all of their kids and grandkids and great grandkids and um stuff like that. So that was kind of neat in a way. And so Nadia holds a special place in my wife's heart, and she was heartbroken that I forgot to mention Nadia. So if my wife listens to this later, I apologize. It's just the brain tumor. I'm not saying Nadia is not important. It's just my brain tumor makes me forgetful. But I think that's it for this one. If I think of anything I left out, I'll either throw it in the comments section or I'll make another video about it. But I'm going to wrap this one up. I want to thank you guys for being here. I know there's a million other things you could be doing, and instead you're listening to me instead. And so I value you. Thank you very much. I hope everybody's holiday season is going well. I hope you stay safe out there. Where I am today, it is really snowing a lot. Um, we got almost 4 feet of snow actually not too far north of me last night. And today, everything's closed down, and uh looking out my window right now, we've got just a ton of snow in our yard. So I hope wherever you guys are and whatever's going on in your life, you're safe and sound and all that. Uh Before I sign off, the routine, right? We would love it if you took a moment of your time to smash the like button, check to see if you're still subscribed, and as always, leave us a comment. That helps us out with the YouTube algorithm, and we love hearing from you guys. And from all of us here at the longest running superhero role playing game on earth, we hope you have a good one, and we'll see you in the next adventure.